I want to add a few more details on top of my last video because now I see that a lot of people are asking the question, well, how do I start learning to code and become an indie game developer? There's so many different ways to become a game developer, and I can only speak from my experience, so take this with a grain of salt. And just like a lot of people, years ago I first started with downloading a game engine because I simply wanted to build a game and I thought that was the beginning of it. But then I didn't understand anything. Even the start function or the update, I was just copy pasting code from a bunch of tutorials and I wasn't going anywhere. So I started Googling, and I also started participating in some of the forums that had local professional game developers in South Korea. And one guy who seemed to have a lot of experience told me, you got to do C. You should be able to build something like Tetris with C, and then someone in the gaming industry might want to hire you. So that's how this whole learning process started. I didn't do exactly as he told me, but just to give you the overall picture, I first did C, C++, and then I moved on to 2D games, and then I moved on to 3D games, and then I did Unity. First, I started with books. All the books that I read in the beginning stage are written in Korean, so I can't recommend any of those. But there's a lot of books out there for beginners, as well as courses, both online and offline. I've had some questions where people are asking what books should I read or what courses should I take. But I think everyone has their own preferences, so it's hard to say. You just gotta Google and find your favorite books or courses. Rather than focusing on what book you read, I think the more important part is after you finish a chapter or every time you finish a topic, I think it's super important that you go ahead and answer some of the questions at the end of the chapter. Courses will give you some homework assignments at the end of every chapter where you go apply the knowledge that you acquired. And I would say whatever course you take, by far, this would probably be the most important part of it. So in the beginning, you might have something like this. Hello world. This is a simple console application. And I truly believe this should be your starting point rather than dealing with Unity and thousands of different options and all the components and 3D rendering and all that stuff. If you haven't built apps before starting Unity, or at least even simple console applications, I think Unity will become a distraction for you. It will actually hinder you from becoming a better developer. And you can do a lot of cool stuff with just C, C++, and the console menu. As you can see, we have a simple calculator here. Okay. So even without 2D or 3D rendering, you can do a lot of cool stuff with just symbols and letters. You can build stuff like tic-tac-toe, or Snake, or maybe even Tetris. Whatever you do, I think it's important that you go through this process in the beginning. Not everybody starts at C. There's many different choices, languages that you can get started on. But the point being, you got to start learning your beginner core programming skills. So after a few months here, I could play some sound files or build a simple game in the console, some text games or board games. And then I used that knowledge to move on to 2D, where I was using things like the Windows API or Game Maker or some other 2D rendering libraries or APIs. As soon as I started rendering, things got a lot more difficult because understanding game loops was pretty challenging for me at the time. But through the same process where you do research, you read about a topic, and then you apply that to your own project, basically repeating that over and over again, I was able to build a bunch of 2D games. Mostly I was interested in top-down shooters at the time, so I built this top-down chopper shooting game inspired by Hotline Miami. But again, everybody's interested in different things. The important point is that you do projects here with the console applications, and then you do some more projects with the knowledge that you earned regarding 2D rendering. This process alone, I think I spent many months. I had zero programming experience before this, so I might have taken longer than some other people. But you should know that you probably won't be able to do this in a short period of time. I think patience and dedication is important. Anyways, after a bunch of 2D games, I started asking, what about 3D? And that's when I started looking into DirectX. And I read 2 really thick books on DirectX 9 and 10. But again, it's the same process where you read about a topic and then you apply that knowledge to your app or game. I built a zombie simulator at this point. It wasn't exactly a game. Rendering a 3D model, the character, and animating it, those 2 things alone were extremely challenging. It had a state machine where a zombie would chase down a player, attack it, and that player would turn into a zombie. And then the same state machine would repeat over and over again until everybody became a zombie. That project was so messy. Even though I was the only one working on it, it was barely manageable even for me. And I think I broke pretty much every coding principles that I know. But trying things out, running all sorts of experiments, you learn stuff. And then I moved on to Unity. I think this entire process took more than a year. I've been on and off, so it's kind of hard to add all the time. But if you do add it up, I think it's definitely more than a year. And by this time, I was even more motivated and more interested in programming. So I started looking into things like Python, Java, JavaScript. I also tried becoming an artist where I was trying to learn Blender or 3ds Max. I even got into blockchains and ran a whole bunch of experiments there. Most of the time I wasn't even productive. I was just learning simply because I was interested. At this time, most of the questions that I had in the beginning were naturally answered as I went through this entire process of learning different languages, learning different topics, and after each topic, experimenting with it. But in the end, my biggest interest was always in Unity, so I keep coming back to this. But ironically, it's the other stuff that helped me understand Unity better and be more effective with it. Sometimes I see people asking the same questions that I had in the beginning, but there was never a single moment where I had all the answers. Some of them were answered here, some were here, some were answered here, some were here, or some of the questions are still ongoing. And sometimes I feel like you can't answer a question without answering the previous ones that came before it. And I'm guessing this is really unorthodox. I never had any kind of formal education in computer science or programming. I was a business major, but this is my experience. And when I see people asking, how do I go from here to here in a single day? I really don't know how to answer that. All I can say is Google stuff, do your research, and apply whatever you learned into your own projects. I know I've pissed off a lot of people just by saying that, but that's all I know. So you got to be willing to learn, be prepared for the long term. And that's all I got to say for this video. Let me know if you have any questions. You can reach me on my Discord server. And thanks for watching. Have a great day.